I'm AJ Bianco, host of Reflect Ed, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Just like the show you're listening to now, shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
And what I was actually relying on were some really old coping mechanisms and defenses that weren't working. Mm-hmm. And so I relied heavily on my perfectionism, and I relied heavily on being liked and people pleasing.
Welcome to the Burned In Teacher Podcast. I'm Amber Harper, and the educators on this podcast are brave enough to share their stories of burnout with the world. On BIT, we get real, we get honest, and we take action. Action against the burnout with stories from burned out teachers, advice from experts, and actionable steps you can take today to beat the burnout and become a happier, more fulfilled human being. Let's get started. You know, during my 12-year teaching career, it seemed like there was always something throwing off my lesson plans, mindset, or goals. And when I began to burn out and tried to talk about it, all I heard was join the club, go for a walk, have a glass or 3 of wine. This is just the way it is. The current challenges you're facing, distance learning, new technologies, higher expectations, discipline issues, a personal crisis, a global pandemic, all of these challenges make your everyday life seem unmanageable. Until now. Teacher burnout has been hacked, and the book is here. In Hacking Teacher Burnout, I share my 8-step process that shines a light on burnout as an opportunity for growth and change. And in it, I empower you to become burned in, a fulfilled, happy, efficient, and effective teacher in the classroom and in life. You'll learn the steps you can take action steps based on your burnout type. Feel ready for the next challenge. Thrive, not just survive, personally and professionally. Feel ready for and learn how to grow through your burnout, and so much more. Hacking Teacher Burnout is here and ready for you to order on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com, so go check it out. Or go to hackingteacherburnout.com to learn more and place a bulk order for your staff. Take a deep breath because you're about ready to do something big for your burnout. Burn on. Hey, what's up, Burned In teachers? Thanks so much for joining us for episode 95 of the Burned In Teacher Podcast. Can you believe it? Episode 95. And all 95 episodes have been one part burnout and all other parts action, inspiration, and support for teachers dealing with burnout. I am your host, Amber Harper, and I empower burned out teachers to believe that they deserve and can achieve a happier and more fulfilled career and life with my 8-step burned in process. Assuming that you just got back from break and completed your first full week of school. I know a lot of us went back on Monday or Tuesday, and I hope that you have been able to get some rest. And let me really quickly tell you that it's okay if you were dreading going back. It's okay. And it's okay if you're listening to this today and you're already feeling drained, not just by the everyday events of being a teacher, but by global events that are happening every day that could be draining your mindset and your energy. I am being severely affected by what's happening in the States in these last couple of days. And I'm not going to lie, it makes it really hard to want to show up, doesn't it? It does. And it's times like this that I'm so grateful that there are people like Andrea Tessier, who I'm going to introduce here in a second, to help us to bring more sustainable coping mechanisms into our daily challenges. You know, it's times like these where we can jump on social media and get sucked in, if not shoved in, to the trauma that is happening all over the world. Here in my country, I am consistently reminded that there's a lot. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of systematic changes that need to happen. And I have to remember what I can control. And it's times like these that those of you who are listening are going to set yourself up for better success when it comes to coping with these challenges because you are surrounding yourself, even by what is going into your ears, you are surrounding yourself with people who want to help to prepare you to be successful in these challenges. Today, I am sharing my interview with Andrea Tessier. She is a master educator turned wellness coach for educators. She helps teachers overcome burnout and fall back in love with teaching again so that they can experience freedom and make an impact that inspires others and changes lives. Her 9-step pathway flows beautifully with the burned in process. So if you are burned and over it or burned and unbalanced, especially at a stage 0, 1, or 2, this episode is going to help to get you on that pathway to a more conscious classroom and conscious life. Let's dive in. Andrea, thank you so much for coming on the Burned In Teacher podcast today. We're so excited to have you.
Hi, Amber. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you so much for having me.
You know, you reached out to me on Instagram, and the second that I clicked on your profile and learned what you were all about and what your mission is and what your story is, I knew that you'd be a perfect fit to be a guest here on the podcast. So you were a teacher for quite a while. In fact, you and I were teachers in the classroom for about the same span of time. So will you tell us a little bit about your journey and where you're from?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in Canada right now. So I actually grew up in the prairies. I did teachers college in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So any prairie people, hi. And then as soon as I finished teachers college, I had that like bug to go overseas. And so I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to move to China for a year. And 11 years later, I moved home. And so
Wow.
yeah. So that journey ended up taking me through mainland China to the Middle East. And then I landed in Hong Kong for about 6 years at a really, really incredible international school there. So most of my teaching career, 11 years, was overseas before I moved back to Canada. And I don't know if there's anybody that is listening that has dabbled in the international circuit, but it's really a community and like an entity in itself because, you know, you can choose your schools that you work at that really align with your mission and values. And so I was really surrounded by these incredible communities where I had teachers that were super inspiring that worked alongside of me, well-resourced schools. And so kids were really able to do incredible things. And then life being what it is, I landed back in Toronto, Canada, and that's where I am now. And so I taught there for a couple years. In middle school, I've taught actually the range from grade 2 through grade 8. And the burnout, I would say, happened over my last 2 years of teaching.
So I have a couple of questions about this journey of yours. So I didn't realize that you taught internationally. So that's really interesting. So do you see a huge difference? It sounds like what you just said. You said well-resourced schools, tight-knit communities. Do you see a lot of differences between the international schools that you taught at versus schools in Canada versus maybe what you see happening in the States where we are?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of the teachers that I talk to now in my community are based in the States. And like I said, yeah, the schools that I worked at internationally, again, really well-resourced. Students were just super committed to service learning and action and inquiry, and schools really had the resources to be able to support that. And in Canada, the system is a lot more supportive than the teachers than from what I hear is happening in the States a lot of the time.
So you said then your last 2 years when you came back to teach that's where your burnout set in. Is that because of the differences between the international support versus your Canadian support system? Or can you kind of go into that story and where your burnout started and maybe how that led to you leaving and what it is that you do now?
Yeah, amazing. So, and that's a question that I really asked myself a lot because the system, I wasn't the same. I didn't have the same like beautiful community. And when you have connection and community, creates this like beautiful buffer around you where you feel so supported. And I didn't feel that same level of connection when I arrived. I noticed myself wanting to do more of the hustle. I felt less valued personally. I felt less supported. And I felt more pressure. But all of that being said, I also noticed that there was teachers within these communities that weren't burning out. And so I also wondered, well, like, what was I doing then that made me burn out versus them? And that's when I realized, oh, okay, I was left to my own devices. And what I was actually relying on were some really old coping mechanisms and defenses that weren't working. And so I relied heavily on my perfectionism, and I relied heavily on being liked and people pleasing. And when these things kind of took the driver's seat, like the internal critic, like showed up too, right? And anybody who identifies as having an internal critic, it's kind of an asshole.
Oh, for
And so
sure.
when that's like the background that's running the show, there's so much shame and guilt and shoulds of like, you should be doing more, or you should be doing better, or that's the dialogue. And so when the external world feels so chaotic, and there's such a parallel to what's happening right now, and your internal world matches it and you feel the chaos internally, that's personally why I think I burnt out. Was I don't want to blame any of the schools that I was at, because even when I was overseas, there were teachers that burnt out. So,
Right.
it happens. And like I said, there was teachers here that weren't burnt out. And so it comes down to like how we're relating to the events that are happening around us. And I wasn't responding in really helpful and sustainable ways to what was happening around me.
Did you have any conversations with the teachers that you saw that seemed to be thriving where you were just surviving, or not even feeling that you were surviving in that situation?
That is such a great question. And I was so angry and I had so much blame. And now I know that all of these are signs and symptoms of burnout. And I had zero idea that this is what happened until, hindsight is 2020. So I had completely isolated myself. I didn't want to identify with anything that was happening in the school. Like my last probably 7 or 8 months in the classroom was me eating lunch in the dark by myself because I didn't want to talk to anybody. And so it was like this angsty energy. And there was even a coach at the school who was willing to help. And I like had this attitude of like, no.
Yeah.
So I'd really built up a wall
Mhm.
that was not effective.
So as a teacher coach now, I'm
Mhm.
sure that you can identify with this because you have teachers in your community that you could probably say, and I know that you have a conscious classrooms path that I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about. I would identify those teachers where you were as completely like stage 0 burned out, isolated, ashamed, angry. You don't want to do anything different. You just want anything you can do to get out and get away. Would you agree with that?
Totally. Like when I talk about my last day of work, I visualize myself like riding my bike away and like giving the middle finger, like
Mhm.
get me out of here.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
am so done.
So when you were feeling that way, when you were leaving, I mean, what was your final straw, first of all, to decide I am going to leave? And did you leave with the intention of becoming a teacher coach full time?
Zero, no, not at all. I had the intention of leaving just because I couldn't do it anymore.
Mhm,
It had gotten to the point where I was not motivated to look for other jobs,
mhm,
and I knew that I just needed a break.
mhm. You mean other teaching jobs or other jobs in general?
Yeah, other teaching jobs.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
So
yeah,
what was your
so
journey there as you rode that bike? I mean, metaphorically,
yeah,
rode that bike away. What was your story there? How did you come up with conscious classrooms, and you have a website and a community? What inspired you to I mean, essentially you stayed in the education space. So it wasn't a middle finger to teachers.
no,
It
God, no.
was
Just like
it
that situation at the
yeah, yeah. So tell me more about this and what it is that you do now that you've learned from your own burnout journey.
man. You know what? It was so organic. It became so clear after like I number one tell people like if that's the state that they're in, they need to get some space.
Mhm.
And so that was really important to me to like drop down to basics, reconnect with my body, reconnect with like my soul and my mind and what was happening internally. Um, And when I did that, I think the tendency for a lot of us is to plan, right? As
Mm-hmm.
teachers, we're so hyper vigilant, we want to plan, and that was really, really scary for me not to have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of did the thing where I got out of my own way and just allowed things to unfold. And when it did, I very quickly got redirected onto the path that I know right now I am meant to be on.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's a little bit spiritual woo-woo maybe for some people, but it really was for me. So I took just time to personally heal myself, which meant, I got away, got some space, and reconnected with my body, my mind, and my spirit. So I was able to see things a lot more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was able to name, oh, that was burnout. So it
Mm-hmm.
was actually like not until I was outside of it that I had the clarity to see it. And when I watch how I sort of healed myself, and for me, it looked like I had a coach and who wasn't like a teacher related coach, who was just kind of like a body, mind, spirit coach. And I essentially walked myself through and with her support to, you know, accepting myself and being aware of myself, being more compassionate and knowledgeable, and essentially loving myself. And with that feeling within me, I could see that there was actually a path that I went through in my own healing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Conscious Classrooms kind of stemmed from, because I navigated all of this for myself and it felt messy and it felt hard and I didn't know where I was going. And it was like I could barely see the step that was in front of me until I got to the end. And then it was like, oh, this is how I connected those dots. These are the steps that were needed. And there was about, 9 steps that were really, really clear that were essential in my healing and that I kind of like have parceled up together in this like little pathway for teachers now. So, it's not that it's not going to be hard. It's still going to be hard, but I'm going to give you a freaking flashlight. I'm going to hang the fairy lights for you so at least you can see where you're going.
Right. What you're saying sounds so similar and very closely aligned with what I have said many times. And listeners, I know you're going to say, yes, we've heard you say this, but that you can't stay where you are because it's easier if you're miserable. It might seem simple to, just do something different. And especially with, Andrea and I, that we've laid out these pathways for you. And I cannot wait for you, Andrea, to go through these. I cannot wait to hear them. But it's simple, but it's not easy, because when you are so miserable and you're so ashamed and you're so isolated, doing anything different just seems like a heck of a lot of work. And it's scary. And it's easier to stay where you're familiar. And if you're familiar with that misery, then it's just easier. And it's certainly easier to find people that are also miserable when you're in that state.
Yeah, totally.
So tell us a little bit about your path. Tell us, are you okay with telling us your 9 steps?
Yeah.
I would love to hear it.
Listen, I talk about this for like 3 months. You'll have to cut me short here because I got really excited about it. So like the number one, and I think for anything, is your connection to your body. Like we forget so often how wise our bodies are and how much wisdom is there. And we get so stuck in the mind and the thoughts and what's happening there that we forget how much wisdom is in the body. And so deep breaths when you're stuck in those moments where you're really, really triggered. There's so much power there. And when I did my yoga teacher training, and I actually had to learn to breathe. And in those moments where we're flooded, we need to do that. My meditation practice was key. Finding like anchors or soulful success habits, I like to call them, that like anchor us into self-care in the day, like things that we are so committed to doing that break the momentum and get us feeling better and embodied. It could be getting outside, getting into nature, putting your feet on the ground, walking my dog. Like it's dogs, you would know, are so good at like getting you out of the house and into doing something else, right? Moving my body was essential in just like shifting the energy and getting outside. So number one, body. The second was connecting to my mind and realizing like what my values were, because that's when we experience like that frustration and disconnection, is when things are not aligned. And I know you talk a lot about values on your podcast. And when was the last time grown-ups have sat down and thought, like, what do I actually value?
Mm-hmm.
And so my work was in looking at, like, where do I spend my time, my money, my voice? What am I talking about? Where do I put my energy? And these are some clues that let us know, like, where we're aligned and where we need to restore some integrity. Because if we say we value something and we're doing something else, it causes a lot of internal strife. So I had to align there, and then I had to align with my emotions. And oh my gosh, like, we spend so much time in this pursuit of happiness that we forget, like, there's this huge range of emotions that we are allowed to feel, and we, have value and worth in what they are. And so, I talk a lot with my clients through, like, naming them to taming them, and feeling the full range of emotions. Like, it's okay just to feel them.
Right.
And it's not going to stay forever. Like, there's always this beautiful wave of emotions, and then it passes because we can give it some conscious attention. We're not shoving it under the rug only for it to show up somewhere else. And it absolutely can feel uncomfortable, but by making the time to feel when it's appropriate to do so, maybe not when you have to take the kids to music, but
Right.
feeling the feels
After
can,
you drop them off.
yeah.
So I have a question. So is connecting to emotion, is that the third step in your path, or does that go with connecting to your mind?
Yeah, I think, well, they're also connected, but when I work with teachers, it takes a little bit of time to be ready to go there, right? Because we have
For
so much
sure.
conditioning where we don't want to feel the hard feelings, and we've been trying so hard to not.
Well, that's what I was going to say too. And it sounds like you and I are also aligned with this idea that we can't fight against the burnout. We have to move through it and grow through it and learn more about ourselves. And like you said too, with values. And I think too, going back to connection to the body, step one is really thinking about movement as more than just necessary to lose weight or become more fit. It really is about, like you just said, connecting with your body, getting those endorphins moving, and just, again, just getting out in nature, getting outside. That is where I find I am the happiest, is when I am being active. I don't do it to just stay fit. I do it for my mental health just as much as I do for my physical health. So I'm so glad that that's part of this.
And it's the quality of energy that we're present to at those times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So connecting to soul and emotions, and the thoughts and feelings that are behind the emotions. So getting curious about that perfectionism, and starting to talk to that internal critic, and where is this coming from? Because it's presenting itself as something that's happening right now, but actually it's been there for a long time. And so, like, let's just start a dialogue with this voice that's in the back of our mind, instead of telling it, to beat it. Like, well, okay, where is this coming from? And just getting curious, because when you've done that grounding work, you have a little bit more space to be curious about what's happening internally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's the next one?
Yeah. So when you've done that work, then I move into boundaries work with teachers. And that's when I was able to get clear on my boundaries, because I had already worked with the mindset behind it. We jump to, like, set boundaries, and absolutely teachers need boundaries, and teachers need boundaries so that they can have balance in their life.
Right.
There's a lot of internal work that needs to happen so that those boundaries are realistic and sustainable. And so when I talk about boundaries, and you do as well, it's like, those are those protective lines that protect your time and energy, your belongings, your physical space. And we have to believe that we're worth it, that we are deserving of those boundaries, so that we don't feel like the shame and guilt when we, tell people about them. So I talk to teachers very practically about boundaries with time and ways to negotiate that. And then we can move into, like, relational boundaries. And so I personally think that the job of teaching isn't hard because of the kids a lot of the time. Most of the time, teaching gets really challenging because of all the other crap.
Right. The other adults.
And so what do those relationships look like and feel like, and how can we nourish more positive boundaries? And And what is my responsibility to respecting other people's boundaries too?
Yes. I think that's really important that you just said that, because part of that perfectionism and those boundaries is being okay with even leaving at your contract time if you have gotten your work done and you've begun to set those boundaries and you're working on your time management, and you leave not feeling guilty that there are other people that are staying. I hear that a lot from teachers, that I'm afraid of judgment for leaving at my contract time when I'm ready to go home, and there are other people that are staying and they see me leave and I feel bad.
Yeah.
There's that almost like that emotional boundaries there where you have to say, this is my choice. These are my boundaries, and I'm going to choose not to feel guilty. And if they ask me how I'm doing it, I will surely share with them, what my secrets are. But that has been something that was a challenge for me, and continues to be a challenge for teachers too, that guilt, that teacher guilt.
And I think that it's so powerful to be able to know and understand deeply that we are not responsible for how someone else feels.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
Like we can only be responsible for how we show up, and we, are our best in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that grown up is responsible for their response.
Yes.
And their path, and they have their own, perception and stories and judgments because it's their story.
Yes.
And yeah.
Great point. Great point.
Thanks. So the next step, which I think is 6 in my plan, is breaking boundaries, which, I'm very purposeful about, because people are like, what? I just set all these boundaries. But I think when you're really, really clear on what they are, you can be more flexible. The teachers that don't have to control everything, that are like okay with going with the flow because they're so grounded and rooted in who they are. They have these boundaries and know how to keep themselves safe so that they can deal with uncertainty and change because they trust themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They've spent all this time developing self-trust so that they can surrender and go with the flow and know that it'll be okay. And so
I love that so much, because I love boundaries and guidelines, but I also, and I'm sure that many of the teachers who are listening are saying, I don't mind guidelines, but I want the freedom and autonomy to be able to break them and bend them. And sometimes we have to do that without telling anybody, that quiet subversion type of boundary breaking. But even for ourselves to say, no, it's okay. Like I have done the work in order to say that I'm going to be I call it guided flexibility. Mm-hmm. So that you have set yourself up for success, that if and or when you go off the path that you've set, that it's okay.
Totally. Mm-hmm. And because you're so aligned with your values that you're still rooted in something that
absolutely
pretty with you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so once we get to this point, all of this is kind of like working on the self, working on like your community and how you show up. And then it's moving forward. And so I think for a place of moving forward, we need to first like realign ourselves with creativity and joy and play. We can get so freaking serious, and we need to take time to prioritize like more high vibrational states when we're in flow and we're genuinely playing and enjoying what we're doing, like doing things for the pure enjoyment of doing it and no other purpose, where I'm getting stuff done and multitasking, like just have fun. Yeah. And for me, that was such a huge part of feeling better, because I could be purely in the present moment. It would raise me up so that you're not as stuck. Mm-hmm. And I think it just takes into consideration that we're whole people, not just teachers in a classroom. And while that is such a beautiful, beautiful job, I think we're more than just that.
Absolutely.
Play and creativity that taps into us as whole beings.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes back to the boundary setting, is that you have to be okay with saying, I can't commit to this because I have an appointment. And that appointment could be with yourself, taking a walk in the park.
And it doesn't have to be more than that. Like, and no can be a one-word sentence.
Yes, exactly. 100%.
The 8th step is about building community, connection, and collaboration. I think
Mhm.
when you've done all this work, now you can show up with these like really authentic, powerful, collaborative relationships and community. And we know that burnout thrives on disconnection, like hello, crying in my room in the dark at lunchtime. And humans need connection to thrive. And I know that right now that face-to-face connection is so hard, and it just means that we need to get creative, I think, in how we do this. But for me, I needed to take the time to create deeper connection. So I desperately wanted to be seen and to be met. And I think that's just such a normal human need, but that meant that I had to go first.
Mhm.
And so it meant that I had to start telling my story, and it meant that I had to come clean about some of the feelings and the path and all of the things. And it was so incredible that when I started doing that, other teachers were like, me too. And the permission and the connection it creates. So,
Well, I think what's really interesting about that is that you can connect with other teachers who are struggling with burnout in a positive way and or in a negative way, where you can come together like what you're talking about here and say, I can show empathy to you in this situation because I've been there, and let's work through this together. Or you could connect with other burned out teachers in a what seems like a positive way where you're venting and talking about all the problems, but that's where you stay. And that's what I love so much about having this path. It's that this is a path to help you to grow out of that, out of those negative, toxic conversations and relationships, and to connect with other people who want to be validated and they want to be heard, but they also want to be helped.
yes. And I think sometimes it's like the harder feelings that come out first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the behavioral signs of burnout, which we can see in other people before we see it in ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that cynicism and pessimism, and those are all just cries for I need some help here.
Yeah. Yeah. So everything that you're talking about is really interesting to me because you have a degree in advanced psychology.
Yeah. So it's actually like, it's so beautiful that this is where I ended up, because I was so passionate about psych when I was doing university, and then I ended up choosing teaching. It was just, what felt right at the time. And when the teaching came to, a close, and I started being really interested in coaching, it was again like this ping from intuition, I think, like in my gut, that was like, you need to make your mess your message here, like your job is to help teachers now.
I just wrote that down. That is beautiful.
It's like, yeah. And it was just like, well, this would be a perfect amalgamation of like my passion for psychology and the brain and talking to people, as well as like I freaking love teachers and I love education. And I believe that teachers are the biggest influences out there. And, there is a way to put all of this together.
Mhm. I think it's so interesting too that you have this history of being in the classroom, very, very much like me. I mean, I taught in the classroom for 12 years. And I think there's a difference between having a coach or somebody that is mentoring you, who has been in the trenches, who has been there, who has felt those feelings and been in that place emotionally, physically, mentally, and then is now outside of it, where that is their full time responsibility, is supporting teachers. Sometimes there's kind of a stigma of, well, you left the classroom, so that's clearly your answer. Well, no, it's because following my purpose and my people is that I cannot fully be present for students and teachers and my family at the same time. So you having that perspective and being from the inside, now on the outside, having that clarity, having this pathway, having this support system for teachers that are in it, it offers so much perspective and conscious guidance, basically. I mean, using your words there, that helps them to see that there's not necessarily a journey out of the classroom, unless that's what they want, but a journey out of the burnout.
Yes, totally. Totally. And I think that's why it's so powerful for teachers to talk to other teachers, just because of the nuances of the profession, of the language, and, talking to people outside of it is also great, but just knowing what it feels like, and knowing the intricacies of the job and how many hats you actually wear, I totally get it.
So with our current situation of, teaching during the pandemic, some teachers still teaching virtually full-time, hybrid model in the physical classroom, what are the conversations that you're seeing in your community and that you're hearing from your teachers?
Yeah, teachers are afraid. Teachers are anxious. What I'm really noticing is teachers feeling that frustration with not being in control. That external world outside of them being so chaotic, and needing that with the internal chaos as well. And they're looking for answers, and they're looking for more organization, and they're looking for things to change outside of them. And I totally get that, because our job revolves around things running smoothly,
Right.
so
Right.
that everyone can be safe, and for things to run smoothly, and for the students to be at their best. And what I've noticed is what we do have control over is our internal world. And there's actually so much more we have control over than we think.
Absolutely.
And that has to do with how we regulate our physiology. It has to do with what we focus on. If we are focusing on our attention on all the things, the problems, all the things we can't do, of course that's frustrating. And the meaning that we're attaching to everything that's around us. So all of that is within our control, I believe.
So what would you say to the teachers who are listening to this? What would be the first thing that you would suggest that they do when they're feeling those feelings, that lack of control, that overwhelm, that chaotic feeling? What would you tell them to do first?
Like, number one, stop, breathe, take 3 minutes if you can. And, the yoga teacher in me says, like, some deep belly breaths and start to regulate, because we're dysregulated in those moments. And, when I think about the physiology of the body and the nervous system, the nervous system that's responsible for fight, flight, freeze, that parasympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system can't work at the same time.
Right.
And so it's like the gas and the brake in the car. We actually consciously have to shift gears, and working with the breath and taking some deep belly breaths is key to just switch over. Naming, what am I feeling right now? Okay, this is anxiety, this is fear, this is anger. Can I tap into what is the story I'm even telling myself about this right now? And can ground down. Like, I love putting my hands on my body and just reminding myself, like, I'm safe right now. It's going to be okay. I am safe. And that's like the first thing, like when you're triggered, we need to drop into the present moment, because the present moment is not where the anxiety and the fear rests. That's in something, more in the future or in the past.
I love everything that you shared. Is there anything else that we've left out of this path that you've set?
I think we just didn't talk about that last step, which is, about gaining clarity on your mission and purpose.
Oh, great.
And I think that becomes clear when you've done all of this work. And then we can reframe ourselves, our mission to serving others, and leading from a place of not only open-mindedness, but open-heartedness, and connecting with others, saying yes. We're just more open to knowing and reminding ourselves why we are here. And our purpose doesn't have to rest in a job. Our purpose can be so much bigger than that. But when we are so clear on what that is, and mine personally is to connect, to educate, and to heal, and whether that's my own or someone else's, we can do this in so many ways. And so for me, it looks like serving other teachers. For teachers, it looks like the beautiful work that they do in their classroom. And you can see that when you're grounded and aligned and in integrity with your true nature.
Absolutely. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for sharing all of those steps. They are fabulous. I can't wait. I'm sure we're going to lay them out in the show notes for sure, so people can easily follow them themselves and think about where they are on that pathway. So how can people find you and learn more about you, Andrea?
Amazing. So I have a website. It's just my name, AndreaTessier.com. There's a couple of my different offerings that are up there as well. I work with teachers one-on-one and walk them through the pathway over 12 weeks of coaching. I do group coaching as well, where we really focus on creating more balance in our life through boundaries and the belief systems that are not working behind them. And I also have a Facebook group that's called the Conscious Educators Collective, and that's free. And I post content daily, which is either me doing a live or a blog post that I wrote, or just some tips and tricks to get in alignment and get you feeling really, really good again. So that would be a great place to start. Or on the socials, like I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm always willing to jump in and offer value to teachers.
Oh, well, I really, really appreciate your time, Andrea. This was fantastic. And again, if you're listening to this and you believed before that there was no support, no help for you out there, Andrea and I found each other. So there are many, many former teachers or current teachers that are there ready and willing to listen. So Andrea, thanks again for coming on the podcast. So grateful for you.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast episode, you can head over to burnedinteacher.com, where you can access the entire vault of Burned In Teacher podcast episodes and more information about ways I want to help you go from burned out teacher to burned in human. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would be so grateful if you would head over to iTunes and leave a review and a rating about the Burned In Teacher podcast. Until next time, take a deep breath, because you just took another step to becoming a burned in teacher. Burn on.